Hi, this is Father John Stang, and I'm here to recap session 5 of our discernment group, where we've been talking about St. Ignatius' rules for discernment. The week before, we talked about spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation, and just briefly to explain what those are, spiritual consolation is when we feel a real joy or calm or peace that often comes from a prayer experience from the Lord. So, for example, let's say you're reading, "The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall want. In verdant pastures he gives me repose. Near uh, restful waters he leads me." As you read that, let's say that in your heart, you start to feel this calm, this peace, this joy. You really feel the Lord loves you. Maybe memories start to come back about how you were loved as a child. That's an example of spiritual consolation. A spiritual desolation is contrary to that, where we can often feel discouragement. We can feel very sad. We can feel a lack of confidence or love of God. Maybe we go to prayer. We just think about how we're not loved by God, how we feel unworthy, or whatever the case may be. But it's not of God. And so in both cases, St. Ignatius gives us some strategies for how to deal with both of those things. That's what we talked about in the session for today. And so with spiritual desolation, I'll start with that first. There's a few things that we need to keep in mind. The first is that we don't want to make any major changes when we're in spiritual desolation, whether that's prayer routines that we have or even making any major discernment decisions. We want to stay away from that. Knowing that consolation will return, or that we need to be more in a balance or equilibrium, but we don't want to make any major changes. The second is to resist that. And that can come through prayer, like just a prayer petition, meditation, meditating on sacred scripture, maybe examining it just to see, okay, where did this desolation start exactly? And try and just think about that. And then finally, a suitable penance. So maybe not looking at our phone or doing something that's going to lead us towards temptation. All of those things can help us resist that desolation, and knowing that it's a work of grace. The Lord is the one who will bring it back to us. It's not our work, but His. We also need to be patient with that, and that actually vexes the enemy's tactics. Even ask for the grace of patience. And then finally, we need to know that the enemy is going to act like a couple of things. Going to act like maybe a woman. This is St. Ignatius's words, that's going to try and tempt us, but we'll flee if we resist. And finally, the enemy is going to act like an army chief who's going to try and attack our weakest defenses. So whatever our weaknesses are, we need to be on guard against those. That the enemy is going to try and attack those things when we're in desolation. So we also need to ask why exactly we might be in desolation. There's 3 reasons for that. One is we could be negligent or lazy just in our life of prayer. Maybe we're not doing prayer. We need to make sure that if we're not, we need to find a way to get our prayer routine back on course. The second is that desolation might be, we might receive that as a grace to help purify us, right? To draw us back to the Lord, knowing that it's all about His love. He's trying to make us rely on Him and not on ourselves. And finally, it humbles us so we don't build a nest on our own accomplishments, on our own pride. Again, the prayer is not our work, but it's the Lord's work. And he wants us to rest on Him and not ourselves. Finally, when we're in consolation, we need to prepare. And so we need to think about, okay, I'm in consolation now. It's not that we are just waiting for desolation to come around the corner at any moment, but we need to just be prepared that it can come. So we need to think ahead a little bit. And so we need to do this by, first of all, humbling ourselves, knowing that when the desolation returns, right, or when the consolation is withdrawn, how am I going to react to that? And I would suggest a few things for that. One is maybe having some prayer verses that you really like from Scripture that really mean a lot to you, to reflect on those. Psalm 23, as I mentioned in my opening example, that's a really good one, but there's a lot of others that you can choose as well. Maybe there's a prayer that you like to say. Maybe it's an Our Father, a Hail Mary, or just maybe some other prayer that you really like. I also would recommend, anytime you have a consolation, to write that down in a journal, so you can go back and you can refer to it when the desolation comes, so you can know, okay, well, yes, I was in desolation at this point, but the consolation will come back. That was real. It did happen. The Lord has been faithful to me, and he'll be faithful again. So to have that just prepared, it's like having quivers in your arrow, so that way you can be on the attack when desolation comes. You're not caught unprepared. And finally, very importantly, we need to make sure that we bring these things to the light. So we need to not hold these things in. We need to speak to a competent spiritual director, or maybe even a confessor, especially if it leads us towards sin, and bring those things to the Lord. And we find that if we say those things often out loud, then oftentimes it doesn't have a hold over us anymore. That the Lord can really take those things and bring, and maybe consolation itself, but at least the desolation itself won't control us. So anytime we have those feelings, bring that to someone who might be a competent spiritual guide. It could be a priest or just a lay person even we know who can guide us. But just to be open about that and not to keep those things in the dark. That's rule number 13 from St. Ignatius of Loyola. So those are just some spiritual strategies to help us when we're in consolation and desolation. I hope that helps you in fighting the spiritual battle, and I hope you're able to join us next week for the 6th session. Thank you.